I think in the army you're part of a family. You're very much part of a family. And in the Royal Australian Army Nursing Corps, you're part of another family. And most people, I mean, a lot of us were trained nurses. We had our other ranks who weren't trained, but they were at the level of a nursing aide. And therefore we also had medics, and we had the medical corps and dentists and so on and so forth. I was born in Seymour. My father was on the railways in Seymour and my mother was a housewife. And I had 3 brothers and another sister, but I was the last one of 5, so there was a bit of a gap. I stayed in Seymour for my education, the whole of my education, until I went nursing. And I went off to Melbourne, to Box Hill Hospital, and I did my general nurse training there. And I stayed there for a couple of years afterwards. And then I decided I wanted to go overseas, so I went to England and I did my midwifery in Scotland. And came home and about 7 or 8 months later I decided to join the army. Vietnam was happening, but it wasn't, because I'd only been home for that short period of time, Vietnam wasn't my focus to join the army for that reason, but it sort of was all happening. And I guess I was fortunate in one way in that I did join then, because I did go to Vietnam within about 18 months. We were very busy at different times. When the battalions were out, and particularly in contact with the enemy, you were, really on your toes a bit to see what would come in. And the casualties would come in. We would be told that they were in contact out there and to expect casualties. You didn't know what sort of casualties, what injuries were coming in. Sometimes if it was a minefield, you might be told. But the choppers would go in and extract these boys out and put them up into the choppers and bring them in to probably about 30 yards outside the theatre in the helicopters. And you would have teams out there to collect the boys out of the choppers on stretchers and replace the stretchers, because often the helicopters would go back in to extract more wounded. And then they would be brought into what we called the triage area of theatre, it's basically a sorting area, and where you prioritised your patients. So we would get immediately into resuscitating them, and in lots of cases you had a lot of work to do there. It depended on how bad the injuries were. And the quickest, when I was there anyway, that we had somebody from the time they were hit to the time on the theatre table was 18 minutes. But one boy in particular, he was a young lad who'd been wounded, and he came in and he was resuscitated, and he was talking, and he talked to all the theatre staff and myself, and then he went to theatre and he just had a massive bleed in which they just couldn't stop. And of course the boys, theatre and myself too, I guess being in theatre you're a bit protected in some ways because you don't tend, or we didn't tend to lose too many patients. So it sort of really hit us that boy, we had lost him. Now he was the only boy that in my time there that I can remember us losing. So it was a very interesting posting. I went back as the matron of what they call Woodlands Hospital. It was on the naval base, and it was minor sick basically, and we looked after families there. So that was an interesting 12 months, and different because in the Australian Army you don't look after families. Singapore back to Melbourne, and there I stayed for something like 7 years. I was still a major. I was a major for some time there. We moved during that time. We were Albert Park, Vic Barracks, and then we moved up to Canberra. So I had to move the directorate 3 times. And in Canberra, when I was in Canberra, I was there for about 18 months. And from there, I went to Brisbane. I was promoted to half colonel in Brisbane, and I stayed up there for some time. And then I went to go back and do my degree. And I did the first year of the degree, and the then Matron-in-Chief of the Army, Army Nursing, became ill. And they said to me, you can stay and finish your degree or come back. And I thought, I'll go, I'll come back. And I went back to Canberra, and I was appointed Matron-Chief Director of Nursing Service Army. And there I stayed for 5 years, and finally got out, retired with the rank of Colonel, and went back home to Seymour. I have no regrets whatsoever of my time in the Army. It was a wonderful time. You meet wonderful people. You're caring for the troops. And I haven't talked too much about the patients, but they were absolutely wonderful. The soldiers are great. I mean, they're scallywags at times, and you have to be on your mettle when they're hiding the beer in the cistern and things like that. But, they really are great people to look after. And the other troops that you are working with are great as well.